So culturally, it varies, but generally people will represent their, in the, the way that they represent their mind. We know modalities and submodalities. Behind them, physically, usually is the past, whereas in front of them is in the future. Some cultures it's reversed, or the left is the past and the right is the future. Cultures that read left to right. It would be reversed for cultures that read right to left, but there's these linear representations of time. But when we do a sphere working, we're arranging a structure of meaning around ourselves that's non-linear. It's spherical and circular rather than just linear. And so we have these letters, this map of meaning arranged around us in a non-linear way. And whenever you do this exercise enough and visualize these things, you're creating through neuroplasticity, the structure of your brain changes as you memorize things. So the more deeply it becomes memorized and easy for you to create this structure around you, another way of saying that it's in your light body, it literally, the electrical structures of your neurons, which they say there's more neuron connections in the brain than there are known stars in the universe. However that makes sense. Like, that's a measurable thing, apparently. But so this electrical meaning making thing in your brain literally structurally comes into alignment with this fractal of meaning that objectively exists. So you're trying to rearrange the structure of your subjective world structurally, the structure of your brain changing to be now in alignment with the paths and the spheres. And I was talking about the letters and all of these things. It's very right brain, logos based. The left brain is the right hand, yeah. The left brain, this stuff is the Hermetic knowledge. It's very symbol based. But Carolyn was asking, why can't I just do open-minded, seated meditation? And, given enough time, maybe one can, but typically the failure rate is close to 100% of just achieving enlightenment that way, because the structure is arranged based on a culture that has no alignment with these things anymore. So you're just observing that more, but once you've created this imprint, then you can sit in silent meditation and have a gnosis arise much more naturally, because you've created a structure of alignment. But really, even beyond that, this marriage of the left and right brain, like the letters and the understanding of the meaning can be very linear, but you're plugging them in to this non-linear spherical structure. The opposite of linear is spherical. They're two poles. They're the yin and yang, the masculine and feminine. So you're sitting with the open-minded focus, and also, completely focused in on the meaning of each path and its position, and meditating on what it means as a whole. And you end up having this unification that sparks awareness. It's like a higher dimensional lightning strike. You know how lightning strikes and you can see everything around you for a second. It was really dark, but all of a sudden you can see. It's like when you hold these poles and you understand what all the letters mean, and you've done that work and you're holding them in this shape around you, you're just holding them. It's like you're building up a static electric charge, and eventually this electricity is created, which is the neural connections of the morphogenetic field. It's this higher dimensional structure of consciousness, and all of a sudden you can see, and it's like you're outside Plato's cave of the linear world that you think you live in, and it's all been illuminated by the light and meaning of these letters. in the light body, which is spherical by default.
That's really deep, honey. Can I add some points? Or?
You want to keep recording?
Yeah, this is a deep conversation. So in here, Stan Tenen was talking about like how meditation on the letters opens up, you know, the vertical channel to higher consciousness, and he was talking about like how the light from the sun brings this syntropic, well he calls it negentropic, but I like the word syntropic better, light that gives organization to the plants and the animals and lets, you know, life on earth exist from the informational density of the sunlight. And I guess he was saying that the, you know, similarly there's this density of syntropic light, spiritual light that comes down with this, with the organizational density of information from the higher consciousness, and that gives us the ability to have, you know, free will beyond just like reactive cause and effect, like you hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you. And I guess I was just interested to hear you say something about that, because I know you're very into, you know, getting the power to have free will and free choice, and that sounds like that's been your experience of the spiritual, of part of the spiritual journey too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think of, to do a sort of a segue, as like Billy Carson has talked about the error correcting codes as a metaphor for like the software of like how the internet works. But there's these like Adinkra codes, some African tribe, but they found that it like lines up 100% with the way the internet codes work, and they call them error correcting codes. And it's these structures of negentropy, basically structures of syntropy. And every time I heard him talk about that, I was like, oh, that's what the runes, that's what Hebrew is. They're error correcting codes. And I think that, you know, whenever you're trapped in a battle against entropy, you don't really have that much freedom. But when you've built a strong enough structure of syntropy, then that gives you the space for freedom inside of it, because you're no longer like trapped by the forces of entropy. So I really think it's a balance. You know, like animals don't have free will because they're like, you know, constantly, I don't know if it's a fair analogy, but like they're constantly in reaction to their environment, doing what they need to survive. Humans have created a surplus of protective order, and so long as they can exist within that bubble, they're free from reactionary parts of themselves. They can have higher thoughts of creating the future. And it's like the roots and the fruits, the structure and the process is the particle and the wave. The animals are trapped in the particle reality and can't enter into the cloud probability of like the field, the morphogenetic field. That's where free will is, because nothing has crystallized into a particle yet. Even the North Whitehead thing, like his model talks about this in different languages too, but it is the same thing. So it's like, yeah, I think there's philosophical distinctions about like what freedom is that come into this that we could talk about. Basically, yeah, I just think the higher dimensions, as you rise up on those, you enter into probability clouds of what the future could be, and you can navigate in those with free will.
Well, so would you say a little bit more about, so we were talking about, the letters are these culturally passed down things, and like can totally see how they were revealed, you know, through revelation, but there are so many different alphabets in the world. I guess, like, You know, Dan Tenen shows this really deep way that the Hebrew letters are related to the formation of this hyperdimensional toroid structure, and he says the Arabic and the Greek alphabets might do the same thing, and I'm not sure exactly where the runes come from geometrically or whatnot, but anyways, just thinking about this hyperbody and like why, you know, installing these like letters on the sphere in our representation, I guess. So you're saying it gives us access to this non-linear wisdom and syntropy that we're able to navigate better because it's like it translates some of the right brain information. I don't know. I'm just trying to...
We have to access it through synthesizing the right and the left brain in equal measure. And whenever they're balanced, then it rises to a higher dimension. But if we're like overly left or overly right brained, it doesn't create that arc of higher dimension.
So it helps us both in regular daily life, and would you say a little bit about how it also helps us build the light body for the afterlife and why the letters are important to that?
Well, I don't have any direct experience.
Well, theoretically, I know you haven't.
Well, I think you transcend this concept of an afterlife. You connect with, you know, all of... The whole afterlife notion is I think, a distraction. It's sort of like you're already in the bardo. It connects you with this part of you that's already died, already dead, already exists. So, yeah, you start practicing and navigating consciousness here and now using the thing that you're going to have after you die. You stop relying on the body and the physical senses, and you start relying on higher dimensional meaning and consciousness itself, which is the thing that survives after the death of the physical body. So yeah, you're learning how to perceive in that way here and now, which is why you'll be really good at it, you know, because you have already been practicing. But I think it's important to say, like, this, you know, the letters and what they are and the hyperbody. You have these principles of change and stasis, and there can be no existence and free will without a balance of these things. It's like if everything stayed the same, there would be no anything, but if everything was always changing, we couldn't know anything either. So it's this balance between change and stasis, which is symbolized in like old Egyptian, before the cult of Osiris, by Horus and Set. Horus being the god of order and Set being the god of chaos or change and stasis. And they were seen as like sort of the yin-yang of the Egyptian pantheon. And so the letters in the tradition, and really the vow of the Hierophant, the nailing of the macrocosm to the microcosm, is representative of this mystery in entirety. That's like the Hierophant passes the tradition down. So what the tradition is like, here in this world, there's some things, we just watched The Matrix, I thought it was funny. I said, some things never change, and luckily some things do. But it's like something that never changes is infinite. Like the fact that it never changes is infinite, which is the same as saying it's God. So even in our realm, there are some things that never change. Like geometry and cyclicity, and like there's just patterns that don't change no matter what. And so these are transcendent principles, and each culture has mapped them out in different ways. And they realize that like when you know the things that don't change, you're better equipped to navigate the realm of change, based upon like, you know, being able to rely on an understanding of the things that don't change.
The letters represent the unchanging pattern of how change unfolds.
Yes, they represent the unchanging in the realm of change. So like we're in the realm of changing things, and the passing of the tradition down from one generation to the next is this movement of these unchanging things. And in theory, you know, like they can evolve over time, but usually it's really always just a corruption of the pure unchanging form that was, you know, initially known or can be known, and it can be corrupted through this passing down. But,
yeah, it's interesting, like Stan Tenen puts all this work into recovering like what he believes was the shape of the letters when they were first used to write the Torah, which is different than, you know, later permutations of them. But
yeah, but so in that sense, the letters themselves are, and the tradition itself, like the letters and the tradition are inseparable from one another. And probably in Torah like means that. But so that's the alchemical marriage. It's like you have this unchanging thing in the realm of change being passed down, you know, through dynamism. It's the marriage of stasis and dynamism. They're a perfect crystallization of the alchemical marriage.
Well, that's very beautiful, and something that fascinates me is how it's very contrary to what I feel like is sort of like the postmodern academic idea, which is that, you know, letters are all just arbitrary signs and they don't have any necessary relation to anything. I feel like in this book, Stan Tenen shows pretty dramatically how the letters have a necessary relationship with this hyperdimensional toroid object, and that, you know, he talks about stuff that I've heard you talk about in connection with the sounds of the runes and everything, but like, you know, words even in English that have a B and a T, like bet. So like the Hebrew letter bet, which is spelled bet, teth, is like an enclosure of some kind. So like some sort of like a house. And he talks about like a boot is a house for a foot, and I don't know, he gives...
Even a bet, like placing a bet, like there's a container
right
of something.
Yes, something is being contained. He gives just all of these examples where like these sounds are like conveying the same concept, and it's very contrary to like all modern ideas about how, like, you know, words are all...
They've applied materialism to meaning. They've tried to make the immaterial like lifeless in the same way that they see everything else.
Yeah, so like I see that level of it, and, you know, we've talked about, I guess I remember you giving me the example of like, you know, the Thurazaz rune and how like the sound is connected with, you know, thorns and, I don't know, like sharp.
Yeah, I think this is like the the Tower of Babel. Like before that, there was a language that everybody understood, and I think that that's what this is. Is if I take a Sanskrit mantra and I don't speak Sanskrit, and in theory, you're not supposed to understand the mantras literally anyway, but people do sort of unpack them, or even just the spirit of, you know, if it's a Ganesh mantra or whatever, we could say it's loosely associated with the removal of obstacles, even if I don't know a literal translation of it. But looking at it runically, like, okay, what is the O rune and then the M rune? Ganapate, the G rune, the A rune, the N rune, A, P. Just looking at these sounds in order as like a formula of archetypal progression, I've found that it always has the same meaning. Like what I would take from it through what I know about the runes and the archetypes of the sounds themselves, I don't think is all that culturally distinct. I think that at a deep enough level, they're all saying the same thing, and it's like there are only, you know, like the S sound, s, is that sound. It doesn't matter what like it's called in this language versus this language. The sound of the way that matter vibrates and is willed by consciousness is always s. And it's like the archetype is the archetype, and each culture has labeled it and looked at the crystal through a different facet and seen different refractions of self through that mirror. But I think the sonic archetypes of creation are the same, and that they said, I don't know if he says it in here, but it's like the sound is the shape and pattern of non-existence coming into existence. There's vibration, and that's that gateway between form and formlessness. So there's patterns to how that happens.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. Well, so then, kind of to return again, it's like you've spent all this time building up the sphere of Yggdrasil with the runes and, the runic connections of the paths and everything. And, I started studying the Hebrew letters, and you were, saying that you wanted to take a look at those too, maybe study those too. And I guess I'm just curious about, since both of these letters are used in this deep meditative way and have this relationship to a larger interdimensional hyperbody object, but they're different sets of shapes. I'm sure there's relationships of the shapes, but they just, at a surface glance, they look quite different. How do you make sense of that? Or like you're saying, it's like different angles. I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to understand, how do you make sense of like the hyperbody as it's communicated via the Hebrew letters, say, versus the runes?
Well, I think they're all higher dimensional languages, and it's just like here in our plane we have Spanish, French, English, and there's cognates between them, and you go back and there's I'm tripping myself up because I think that even the roots of our languages come from these, obviously. But the point is, whenever I read Stan Tenon's stuff, I hear insights that I've had that are really profound and have been crystal clear for me, but I've never heard anybody else say it. And I got to it through the runes, and then I hear this person saying this exact same insight that I've had, and they got to it through Hebrew. And they're both, based on a tree. I mean, pretty much all shamanic cultures use a tree as this thing that unifies the world above and the world below. And I think if you trace them back far enough, maybe they come from a singular source, maybe they don't, but I think that they're all pointing to a higher reality that necessarily requires more points of connection to perceive at. And maybe that's abstract, but what I mean is like, it's not just my consciousness, it's like my consciousness and all of my ancestors as a substratum that, like a structure, like mycelial things grow on all of these points as there's a word I'm trying to think of, it's not coming to me. Rhizome, no, it's the substrate, I guess, there's another word for a substrate, but it's like the more points, think of how a mold grows, or like how mushrooms grow. It's like there's a spore here and a spore here, and they're sort of individual, but it's not till they grow out and they connect together. And once there's a large enough mass of connection, then they can fruit a mushroom body and create more spores and spread. And especially in the forest, it's like underneath all of those connect to each other, and there just becomes more and more points of connection below the surface. And the hyperbody is the same way. And It's like in Dune, like the further into the past you can go, the further into the future you can accurately project. And that arc of connection between them is the morphogenetic field. I think that, yeah, when it's this higher dimensional what do we say, Indra's net. I think everything is connected and self-reflective in that. So if I can look at it through another lens and see more, then that's worth doing, like Hebrew versus runes. I think the danger comes from trying to equate them as if they're the same thing, because then sort of they both just get nullified, and we only have so much time. So I do think it's important for people to like pick one, and then like maybe after you've spent 10 dedicated years with one, start exploring another one. But don't like try to do both simultaneously, because you won't accumulate enough like critical mass to reach that arc of higher dimensional connection. Like you have to really stay with one language. This would be like sitting in on a Spanish and an Italian class at the same time. Like you're not going to get very good at either language.
Well, I'm curious, what are some, I have to go pee real bad, but maybe you could start answering the question.
I'm going to keep recording.
Well, I'm just curious about experiences that you've had where you felt like you were getting, this syntropic, higher dimensional information through your installation of the runes in your sphere of sensation, and examples of how that helped you navigate life or gave you magical revelations, or to inspire me to go on with my letter work.
Yeah.